Hello and welcome to Esri's Fire and Emergency Services webinar series. Today we're covering our special event solution and very excited to discuss the upgraded and improved solution that we'll give you information on today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. The recording will be posted online after the webinar to all registrants, and then an email with appropriate links will follow up from after the webinar as well. So I am Mike Cox. I'm your Director of Fire and EMS Industry Solutions, essentially your fire liaison officer. Come to you after 27 years in Henrico County, Virginia, where I retired as a deputy chief and had some experience with special events, as we had a NASCAR facility where we had 2 events a year, plus as any local city, county, or state level government dealt with multiple other special events. With me today is Jeremiah Lindemann, a product engineer on our government solutions team. And Jeremiah's had the opportunity to work with a lot of public safety agencies on solutions over the years. So Jeremiah, please say hi.
Hi, thanks. Very excited to be here, Mike. Yeah, I joined the solutions team a little bit over a year ago, and we just really look at common workflows and help people with a bridge to get up and going much quicker. Before that, worked on the business development team, working with local government out of the Esri Denver office. So thanks for having me.
No, thanks for being here. Again, very excited because special events present a lot of obstacles that we need to apply technology to help solve. And that's, as we're gathering data during a special event or trying to analyze and understand what's occurring on the incident ground, we're normally doing this outside of our normal day-to-day operations. We're not operating in our typical PSAP or 911 center. And the ability also to integrate multiple disparate data sources is incredibly important for large special events because we have multiple agencies that are operating. So we may need to bring in not just traffic cams, but specially installed security camera systems, or maybe the venue has IoT capabilities that we want to integrate into our command processes to help our folks make decisions. Provide the right data at the right time to make good decisions. And we typically did that previously with paper solutions, and we're still printing an incident map in IAP. We understand that we're still generating maps that we need to pass out to field units. And all of our radio traffic was about the only way to communicate incident intelligence to our responders. But we have the ability to use technology to build efficiencies into how we manage that event. And not just the management of the event when it occurs, but even through the application process. And we know the application process for a special event can take days, weeks to months. And the solution we're getting ready to discuss using these technology workflows can take hours or days off of the work necessary to set up for one of these special events. So when we look at, moving from that map on the left, that hand-drawn map, for these complex special events to the map on the right, where we can share that information with just about any agency that's involved. So it doesn't matter if it's a local, state, or federal asset or federal resource. Doesn't matter what radio system they're on. Doesn't matter what kind of computer they're using. But essentially, as long as we can get them connectivity, we can exchange this incident intelligence and share the same data and make sure that everybody has real-time updated data and is making decisions based on that same size up or that same incident assessment. And as an example, here's a marathon that runs through several city and counties, or one county and several cities. But the ability to have this kind of view available to all the agencies involved to understand where resources are committed, to understand if there's patterns in responses or some kind of significant event occurring, whether it's inside your locality or maybe a neighboring locality that's impacted by this special event. And it's not just various localities that are involved, but various disciplines. So why not have a resource map that's available to commanders that has not only fire and EMS assets, but law enforcement assets or public utilities and public work assets that are also assisting with this special event? And the ability to use this kind of view, use this kind of resource tracking and incident mapping capability to really manage those resources in real time. So if we have to put together strike teams or task forces or things of that nature due to an incident within the incident, or some no notice event occurs during your special event, it's important to be able to understand where are my resources. It improves firefighter and responder safety to understand where they are, increases personnel accountability, and allows us to make good decisions in a more efficient manner and taking less time to evaluate that data because we've got good verified intelligence in front of us. And then looking at our ability to do field mobile data collection with our mobile applications. So when you have field observers out and understanding what crowd size looks like, understanding if you have that suspicious package that we can have a picture into the command post or into the emergency operations center and decide who gets that information and when they get it. And these are the kind of issues and obstacles and concerns we're addressing when we talk about our new or updated special event solution. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremiah and have him get into the solution. Jer?
Great. Thank you much, Mike. So just want to give a little bit of context before we dive in as we get started here. So we've been working with several communities on the solution, and there's a lot of people using different aspects of our technology already to handle special events. And we wanted to really look at this as a big picture about how can we provide a solution that really addresses everything. But the things that we've heard with special events are that especially cities are having an increasing demand for more events. There's a bigger frequency of 5K fun runs, brewfests in the park, concerts in city parks. So these events are happening at a more frequently pace, and that means more strained resources on the city. It can lead to inefficient management because you have more events and you can't really just handle them on a one-off. You need more of a system to really look at what are all the events happening. While this is great for the economy, it really just puts more strain on all city resources and increased security risk, as well as you're going to have many people at many of these events. Mike actually had some screen grabs already to kind of speak to the antiquated systems. We've seen a lot of hand-drawn paper maps, especially when it gets to the day of operations. People are kind of doing things on the fly and with what they have best, which oftentimes might just be a whiteboard. Distributed workforce, you have public safety staff that are working these events, and how can you put technology in their hands to really get information what they need, especially when they're in a sea of people and they might have to respond to an incident. So those are all some of the big themes that we've heard around special events. Kind of while we're talking about big themes, we want to really address special events as being a way that we can deliver this with ArcGIS to the whole community. So playing the role of a citizen, I could go to a hub destination that would really show everything that's going on inside my city or my community. And this might be things like things to do, which would lead me to a dashboard of upcoming events that have been approved by the city. And I can look through and I might see an event that's of interest to me and then go ahead and find a more detailed map that might have information about sponsors and maybe a marathon route and so forth. Also highlighting things such as where our breweries or parks, and using story maps or other templates to deliver this information to your constituents. And then if someone wants to apply for a permit, they could do that as well. So we're seeing the kind of end result of all this to also be able to disseminate that information to the general public. What we're working on is a solution that's going to have several apps that will speak to all of this. So there's going to be two solutions. One's going to be for special event planning and operations. It's really specific for assisting public safety, doing planning before the event, how your public safety staff are going to support the event, and then looking at how we could do things better. The other solution does all of that. In addition, it's also going to address permitting. And there's a little bit more detailed review with permitting in that process. I'm not going to touch on that today, but that is an option that will be a part of the overall solution as well.
So, Jared, when we talk about permitting, the legacy process was typically you have a package that would go from office to office. So it might go through a police chief's office, fire chief's office, through public works and utilities, and then back to a county or city attorney. This alleviates that kind of delay and that hard copy transfer of information, correct?
Exactly. It addresses that, how we see a lot of communities are serving their permits through PDFs. So it's just really taking away that permit process. And then oftentimes that PDF will get printed and inter-office mailed around to all those departments. So that's part of the solution that we will address. We won't really touch on that today, but that's really speaking to what all that will address.
Excellent.
So just as a whole, what the challenges we've heard that we're going to alleviate with the solution. The first bullet is just what Mike brought up, is managing that permit application electronically and much more efficiently. Being able to coordinate multiple events. So anytime, if you have a marathon or a concert, there's a lot of agencies. We're going to talk a lot about public safety, but public works and road closures and health departments that might have to do inspections. It really impacts an organization in many ways. And then when we get into the planning side of things, how can we create maps that represent that event? So we have event site map. These are going to be temporary assets that are going to be set up and taken down. So how can we update that map? And then when we get into monitoring what's happening on the day of, how can we monitor where our field staff are and incidents and really pair those things up? So if someone needs to respond to an incident, how can we do that in a much more timely fashion? And being able to keep a history of activities to do after action briefings. And then I showed just a little bit on how we can communicate information to the general public. I'm going to be showing several different applications, and the really thing that we want to highlight is this is a whole system, and these applications are part of a process. Events affect many different people within an organization, so the applications are intended to have different audiences. So you kind of start in this cyclical process on the left. Someone's going to maybe be applying for a permit, or if you're not using the permitting piece, someone still has to catalog an inventory. What are we going to be responding to? And then how do we go from planning to managing the day of the event and then disseminating that? So this is really the whole system, and there's a really established workflow that goes along with it. Okay, but that's I think enough for PowerPoints. Let's dive in and take a look at what this is. I'm going to break the demonstration into kind of three pieces. First, I'm going to talk about planning. So let's think about everything that happens before an event. And what the workflow is for that. So I'm going to switch over here, and I'm going to go into a browser tab. And as we mentioned, this system is designed to manage multiple events at once, not just handling an event on a one-off. So if I'm going to be getting involved in an event and applying public safety resources, I need to start gathering some really basic information about that event. So I'll enter in a name and the type, description. And again, this is the persona of this application is going to be typically an event planner within public safety. They might be within law or fire. That's basically going to kick off that process of setting up the planning process for that event. Other basic things like when's the start time of the event, but also when do things like sponsor booths and porta-johns start getting set up and then taken down. Who's my primary contact, and then just real rough location on the map. So what I do is I'm basically using this special event form as an intake form to help me catalog and inventory all events. And when I click submit, what happens is that event gets added to this larger system. And we're looking at this application called the Special Event Manager. And this is really an integral part of this whole solution. Again, the persona using this Special Event Manager is going to be that safety planner that typically might be within law or fire that is going to be, in addition, taking on those events. I can start to scroll through and sort all these events. And maybe I want to see all the events as they're happening and within the time. I might want to sort them by event type. But if I scroll down here, and that Napier Nights was the event that just got submitted on the previous form. So I can see where all my events are happening on the map. And again, if you're a city, typically these might be within taking up parks or some other type of public space. I can review the event info, which is really looking back at the information that was in the previous Survey 123 applications. And then I have a couple applications here to start creating temporary assets. So again, I'm in the planning phase, and I need to start setting up the plan. So again, if I'm looking at my event manager, I have several different events that are in my community. If I click this create sitemap, what I'm doing is I'm going to create a sitemap unique to that event. So it's going to filter my other events and zoom me into that Napier Nights event, and we can see this is maybe more in a public space. And what I get is a template for me to start designing special event assets. So these special event assets, sometimes you might get this information from an event organizer. Sometimes these events might be held by the city itself, and you might kind of have a rough idea where this information might be. So I can start adding temporary features. So if I'm going to have food concessions, I can start to add information on the display about temporary assets. Well, really basic information, just a description, such as I put in a Euro stand for a food concession. We have a template for these different types of assets that you might want to be adding in. Again, temporary restrooms. I can start to add in a handful of temporary restrooms, which are going to be popular for large crowds as well, and start dropping those on the map. Other assets such as first aid stations, generators. Again, all these things are going to be typically set up before the event and then taken down after. Routes for things like my marathon routes, ingress and egress routes. And then I might have additional areas such as, we'll just say temporary parking for event. And I'll just draw that on the map. I click save. And that's the beginnings of creating a sitemap. So again, all my sitemap is my temporary features for where things are going to be set up. This is really important because when I start to get into response mode, I need to know where these assets are. If an incident happens that's near one of these, food concession stands or a restroom, I need to be able to have awareness of where these assets are, because it's going to be a critical reference point for me later on to respond appropriately. And you can also start to disseminate this information to the public as well, so they can navigate their way around the event. Okay, so that's a site map. The next map that we do in the planning stage is operations map, and this is specifically for public safety. So I click on this map. Same idea. What I'm going to get is a map that's filtered in and unique to that event. So it's going to take me into that Neighbor Nights event, which is in Naperville, Illinois here. And what we see is it's already filtered all the assets that I've already laid down. So it's smart enough to say, okay, we recognize those assets for this one event. Let's add them to this map. What I can start doing now is I can start adding in specific features for public safety. We're making use, we already have an existing solution for road closures, and we're taking that information. You can add it in here as well if you have specific roadblocks that might be set up. I'll scroll down a little bit here. If I have some resource assignments, I can start to add those as well. So for instance, if I have a known location for a fire truck, I can start to add in public safety relevant information. What is my unit ID and radio channel, things that I might want to tie back to. So if Mike's unit's going to be placing a fire truck at this intersection, I can start to save that information on the map and really add it just like another asset, but this is public safety related assets. One other thing that we have here is this is part planning tool as well. So as Mike said, there's an IAP or incident action plan that is typically created for each event. And we see this as being a tool that's complementary and done in conjunction as running those IAPs. So you might have a staff, but you want to kind of figure out where those staff are going to be placed. One of the planning tools we have to help you do that is a very simple crowd estimate. So I can draw something. So for instance, if there's going to be a concert in the park here, I can draw an area, and I'm going to get back a crowd estimate tool. Now what this is using is something called the Jacobs method. It's a very simple calculation that was developed over Washington, D.C. protest. All it does is it looks at the area, what's the square footage in there, and it gives me low, medium, and high values for the number of people. So you can think of high as being like a really big, mosh pit at a concert, but low is still pretty crowded. But the reason why this tool is in here is it's helps me with that planning process. So if I want to take some of the information from IIP, such as I'm going to have on foot law enforcement staff, I might want to have them to be assigned to work certain parts of this area based upon the crowd. So I can add additional information and just drop those resources on the map. So I'm really creating my operations plan where where are my public safety resources? Fire, law, EMS. Again, we have a palette of really common things here. I might want to drop in the command center or medical tent. A medical tent, basically, where's my initial reporting location for these events? Again, this is typically a process that we've seen people do through hand-drawn maps, or you're really kind of taking static screenshots to place these resources. And it's really instrumental to know like where's that initial reporting location to set up my response plan. And then we have generic areas for just perimeters for my different types and operational zones. So it's really a template to start adding in these public safety type resources. Just a couple other tools to make you aware of on this map. Here are to help you within the planning process. We have a gridded reference graphic, very simple tool. So what this allows me to do is I can start drawing on the map. Oftentimes these special events are in big public spaces, especially things like the 4th of July. You have a field where people are going to go out and watch fireworks, and you might have some sponsor booths throughout there. If an incident happens and you need to respond to that, it's not like you can just type in 123 Main Street. How are you going to direct your public safety resources? So that's what this tool will help you do. So again, think of all these maps that we're doing, and there's a reason behind setting up these site maps and operations maps. It's one to have initial reference, but we're going to use them come the day of the event. A couple other tools for pre-planning to look at threat analysis and emergency response guide, kind of what if scenarios if there were things like a bomb blast or a chemical spill in a certain area and how that might affect other people that I can use in my event. So really an overall tool to help me plan where my resources are going to be and some what if scenarios as well along the way. So I'll kind of pause there. I mentioned I'm breaking the demonstration up into 3 pieces, and this was the first was planning. So the planning piece has me enter in new events where I use the event manager to look at all the events that I've entered into that system, and I can always go back to them and I can look up how we maybe set up operations plans for an event in the past. Then I create 2 specific maps. I have asset maps, which are just my temporary features that usually the event organizers or maybe the city might be setting up, and then the operations map for where are my public safety resources.
So Jared, just a quick question. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt there, but so just so understand that basically every part of that process, even from permitting through planning, all that data that's entered ends up being used by the operational map or during the managing the operations, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So as I mentioned, there's a reason for all these maps, and that's really going to be into step 2 of this demonstration is what do we do on the day of? We have a nice map that we can always reference, but it's really going to be setting up this information so it can be used on the day of. Yep. Good. Yeah. Anything else, Mike, to add within the planning piece?
No, I think it's great that just that focus of you're not wasting any time with this data entry. Even the vendor or the venue operator that's entering the data, that data will eventually be used by the operators on the day of. I think that's an important note.
Great, cool. Okay, so let's move into really kind of step 2 of this demonstration piece. This is going to be managing the operations during the event. As I mentioned earlier, there's several different applications. A lot of these applications are going to take on a different persona. So I'm going to mention that as I show these applications because it can get a little bit confusing about who's using this. But when you think about on the day of the event, if you're going to have a command center, you're going to have people inside that command center, such as your dispatcher or commander, and you're going to have people working the event that are going out and actually patrolling and responding to incidents. So several different applications to help set that up here. So let's take a look at this. One thing that I'm not going to really touch on too much is that we have part of the solution is a really unique process to help you create unique operations applications for each event. So what I'm going to be showing you next, we're going to have applications that will be unique for Napier Nights or unique for a marathon. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at that. Well, first, what I'm going to actually show you is, let me move one slide, and I'm going to show you an application that is intended to be run by people working the event. So this could be pretty broad. It could be law enforcement staff, fire, EMS. It might just be law enforcement staff that are forward observers, that they're really just going off and collecting information what they see. So anyone you want to collect information about what they're seeing in the event, we have really simplified form for things like a lost child. We've heard this quite a few times from working with some users that have used our software. Unfortunately, the child has been found every time, but as you can imagine, it sets in quite a bit of chaos and syncing up parents with a kid and in that midst of people within a big event. Suspicious activity. So is it going to be a person that we want to really kind of pay attention to? Is it an object? I can say there's a backpack left unattended, other type. Or I can also report general activity. And this is something we've heard a lot too, is public safety really kind of wants to validate all the work they've been doing and kind of showcase all the importance information they've done. It can also help them plan better for next year, whether it's someone's falling down and I'm giving out Band-Aids at a certain area, or I'm constantly kind of rerouting people to find their place in the event at a certain area. Right now I'm using my computer, but this is intended to be using my phone, so I could use the camera from my phone. I'll just upload a picture real quick here to say, let's go ahead and grab a abandoned backpack. And then if I'm using my phone, I can use my GPS and submit that. It's probably not going to make a lot of sense. I'm in Colorado right now, so it's going to use my location to submit this event. But that's really a simple way for you to use your staff that are working the event to really be a sensor. They can start to collect that information and start to send it back to the command center. So that's really the next step, is where does this go? So we were looking at an application just a second ago for field personnel, anyone that's working the event. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit, and I'm going to play the role of the dispatcher. So a dispatcher that, in a little bit more context here, is for a lot of these events, they're going to have a command center, and you'll have a dispatcher that's working the event. Now they're going to still be getting CAD or 911 calls that they're going to be listening to, but in these temporary setups or the command center, the dispatcher is typically faced with more challenges because they're getting input from a lot of different resources. They're going to get a lot of radio calls about how they need something that needs to get responded to. In many cases, the event organizer might be inside that command center communicating as well. So they're going to be getting several different streams of information, and they need to really marry up the people that are working on the event to the appropriate incidents. And that can be quite challenging. And this is where another one of those antiquated workflows of we've seen on site where people are using post-it notes on top of a map and kind of reassigning where people are. So the intention for this map is to have the dispatcher be able to come in and look at the activity that is reported. So if some suspicious activity gets reported, and that backpack that was left unattended, I could open up the picture of it. But I can also say, well, I want to take that and I want to assign it to a specific unit to go ahead and make sure they follow up on it. So that's a way that I can basically take that information that's coming from the field, and then the dispatcher sees that information. So that's one stream of information is coming from your field staff. But say that scenario of a radio call comes in, and that maybe a fight has broken out, or someone has had a heart attack, something critical has happened. How do I find that information? I'm looking at a different event that we already had some information that was set up here. But what I can do is I can type in something like barbecue, and I can see all the barbecue food vendors that have been set up. So maybe there's a critical incident that's outside one of these sponsor booths that I need to use as a reference. So I can use those temporary assets to really define my location. And then I can start to assign different people. I can start to see what different units are already working out in the field. I can also see what units are already tied up. So if some unit is already responding to one incident, I may not want to send that unit there. I want to really allocate my personnel as they are free. So we can assign this high priority. I can say report of heat exhaustion, and we want to follow up and make sure someone's following up on this event. So, and we'll take this as a medical assignment and create that assignment on the map. So that's how my dispatcher can really start to look at all of this, listen to all the information, start to look at the assignments as a whole as they're coming in. I can also keep track of workers. I can also see the workers on the map. So I get a direct insight as to where my workers currently are. So this is really to alleviate the role of the dispatcher, so they're not having to use those post-it maps anymore, and how they can really take all information that's coming at them from many different places at once and marry it up with the appropriate people out in the field, so you can respond to these incidents in a timely fashion. Okay, so one more application to talk about on the day of is this dashboard. So previously, the application we were looking at earlier was a workforce for ArcGIS, which was specifically for the dispatcher. But those incidents are still of interest to all people that might be working inside of the command center. So the command center, the commander might want this on their tablet, or this would typically be on like the big board or presented up on the display. So there's a few things on this dashboard that we see that stick out is, what are all the open incidents? So what are incidents that we have not taken care of? I can see them on the map, and I also see that asset map that I created earlier. On the right, I also see the last known locations of where my people are. So this is really that comprehensive dashboard at a glance to see what is happening and where are my people. There's a few tabs that are down below too. I have post locations of, so if I had a post of basically where those resource allocations were. I have weather. Now in Naperville, what we're using for weather is Living Atlas data that is live. I don't see much happening in Naperville, but if I zoom out far enough, I'll eventually see some radar data and any weather warnings. So fortunately, it looks like things are pretty good in Naperville today. On the traffic tab, what we see is more Living Atlas data for just a real-time look of where that traffic is. And I also will see roadblocks, which I have not set up here as well. That's something we've heard a lot about too, is especially for things like marathons or parades, we want to know when those roads are going to be reopened again. And then really looking at a total historical call log. So not just the ones that are open, but everything that we've responded to. So if we need to go back to some suspicious activity and look it back up again, if it truly is unified command and I want to see, what are the different types of assignments of, law enforcement versus medical, I can break them down in that way, and how we're following up on them, what has been assigned and completed, or what's being attended to now. So there's a lot that's actually happening here on the operation side of things. That's an insight for this. Again, just gonna back up here and recap. A couple of things is we have our field personnel that are running applications on their phone. We have workforce and the survey 123. We're also tracking their last known locations for that. The dispatcher has their own application to really help them manage incidents, and they're really kind of the relay point to take those incidents and make sure that they're being followed up on with the staff that are in the field. And then lastly, a dashboard to look at all of the incidents and my staff and other real-time information such as weather and traffic in one place. As I mentioned, all these applications that I just showed you, we have a unique process that we're going to create all of these on the fly very specifically for each event. So this is beneficial to use the whole system that I was talking about earlier. If I have multiple events on one weekend, I don't want to be using the same dispatch project or same dashboard necessarily for this. So we have a process that will say, once we have the system set up, let's create these applications so they're unique to that event and just show the relevant asset maps and resource maps for that event. So Mike, I know you've had a lot of experience and working with some of our users too for they're using different aspects of this. So we want to kind of turn it back over to you for any other thoughts.
So the operations, let's say this operations dashboard, which is excellent, by the way, that you have the ability to share out to just about any other agency you'd want to, correct? So if I have multiple agencies coming in, I could share that out, not necessarily give them access to that dispatch workforce project where they could actually go in and change things, but even just have a view only where they could help manage resources by understanding what's going on with the event. That's possible, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Sharing is just the same way sharing works on inside of all of our platforms. So we could share that relevant information of those incidents and our last known locations with whoever we wanted to that's inside our organization. Obviously that's something that it wouldn't be shared publicly, but what you would, choose the people that you'd want to share that information with.
Sure. So if I had a regional coordination center or MAC or say a state EOC that maybe they don't need to directly make assignments, but they could still monitor this view to understand what the resource needs are. Excellent. That's awesome.
Yep.
And so it's another question, if we had additional field mobile applications out, so say I had additional survey 123 form that I was using for another discipline, so I don't know, EOD or even medical, would it be possible to integrate that layer into that dashboard view as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we see this as being a great base that people want to take their information and add. But definitely, if you have additional surveys, you can add that too. We see other people probably wanting to add in other layers of infrastructure they might want to have to be part of these maps. So yeah, it can definitely be extended and added and complemented to the dashboards or other applications.
Excellent.
Cool. All right, cool. So really just kind of wrap up here with the last part of the demonstration, and that's what happens after the event. And oftentimes this is kind of the forgotten part, especially when it comes to the mapping and with ArcGIS. But wanted to show you how we can help you with after action briefings. So typically an after action briefing is done after the event has occurred. Sometimes if it's going to be a multi-day event, you might have multiple briefings, maybe at the end of each day, or if it's a one-day event, it might happen a day or two or a couple weeks after the event. So this application is really to look at what happened and how did we respond to the event. What happens is when you look at this application, again, we see the same asset map, we see all of our temporary features, but they have a little bit of a transparency like the other applications because we want really two things to stick out. We want the reports. This is really all the incidents that the dispatcher was helping manage, anything that was coming from the field or the dispatcher entered in. And then we also have the historical tracks, using Tracker for ArcGIS to see where did my people move and how did they move around the event. And then down below, we have a time slider. And by default, if I click play, the time slider starts moving in 15-minute intervals, which could be changed at any time. But what I start to see is, and I'll just kind of make this a little bit more dramatic and start moving out these events here, is as time moves along, I can see additional incidents. These are mock incidents for this event start to appear. I can also start to see how my staff were moving around the event. So if I have an incident, how did my staff start to respond to that incident? How long did it take us to get there? And I can start to see the incidents will go away if they've been closed on the map as well. So if we've actually marked them as completed, then they'll go off on the time animation. So that's really just a way to look at what happened at the event, how did our people respond, and what incidents have occurred. So just visually, without even getting into a whole lot of analysis, this might be able to tell you, staff allocation. Maybe we need to set up different staff in different locations, especially if this is a recurring event in the next year. Now, one big thing that we've seen happen is people have already been using Workforce in this fashion to handle dispatch for some of these events, and they have to dump that information out, oftentimes to a report. So what I can do is I can either draw an area or get a buffer. I'll just go ahead and take this area and click a report, and I can get back all the activity. So what were all those incidents that had happened? I can dump them back out to a CSV, or I can do a quick printout. I think I had that just open up on another tab. So the end result after the map shows I get a map, but then I also get basically a historical incident log of all those things that were reported via Workforce in that project. So that's a after action report. Pretty simple. It's just to really visualize in time what has happened as far as my staff that are working the event, as well as all the incidents that are coming in, and how we responded to them. So that's after action. Again, I'll kind of pause there, and Mike, if you have any other input for the after action piece.
Well, this is an important aspect, obviously, of the solution, because with a lot of our special events, again, we're operating outside of our public safety answering point, our normal 911 process, and a lot of patient contact or customer contact. If you don't transport off site, you're not doing a patient care report, or you're not really documenting as deeply as you would during day-to-day operations. So the fact that we can go back and look at this in a temporal kind of context and see what happened, when it happened, and where it happened is incredibly important for, again, after action. We're doing performance measures, but also if there's a question about some operation. So say there's, some kind of question after the event. I know, historically throughout my career, it could be years go by, and then suddenly there's a question about, hey, did you run a call related to this patient or related to this incident? And if there's no documentation, obviously it's difficult to respond to those. So very, very important part of the solution, Jerry.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And just to kind of recap on that, so what will happen is these after applications are unique to each event. So we're looking at an event called RibFest. If I had another marathon the next week, I would have a unique after action application with the unique data store for the report type and historical tracks for that as well. And again, there's a process that kind of helps you create these unique applications that come part of the solution. So just want to kind of wrap up a couple PowerPoint slides, talk about what you get and when. So the ArcGIS for special events, again, we'll have two solutions that really let you leverage your location-based data, all the data that you're collecting during the event. Everything can be run as software as a service. So everything I was showing you was all through the web. I was using everything inside one ArcGIS Online organization. So there's no software to install. Obviously there are different components of software that can help you manage that. And if you're doing things inside Pro, for instance, you can read all this data in and use that. There's implementation and enablement activities. So like our other solutions, there is a tool that you can use to deploy them, and you basically get all these applications. And you can also load pre-existing data. So if you already have historical events that maybe you want to add into this solution, you can load that content. But you can also work with Esri. Given that there's going to be about a dozen applications and different personas for all those, we can definitely help you configure that and get you going all the way and educate your team with that as well. All of our solutions are also supported by tech support. So I still find that there's people that aren't aware of this with our solutions, that it's just another product that we have. So if you go to solutions.arcgis.com, all those solutions are maintained. You can, if you have questions or any issues in implementing them, you can contact tech support. And they're also supported, meaning that as new capabilities come out, whether it's things we hear about the solution that we need to enhance, or we're just updating things like dashboard or survey 1, 2, 3, we continue to update our solutions to make sure that they're using the most latest tech as well to help you. Everything I was showing you today is just a little bit of a preview version of what we have for the special events. We're aiming for the User Conference 2020 release, so we're excited to have this here in your hands here in a few months, so anyone can be able to go to the website and deploy this, and there'll be full documentation and support with some other things such as story maps and some tools to help you kind of work through a really how-to documentation for this. A couple other things that we're making use of is we are using some of that cutting edge technology. We're using something called ArcGIS Notebooks, which will be out here later this year to help you deploy those unique applications. If you're using Workforce for ArcGIS, you may have seen some blogs now about how there's a new version of Workforce coming out that's in beta now, anyone can play with. We'll be making use of the new Workforce as well, which does some things like supporting offline capabilities as well. So that's some of the things that we'll have that will be a little bit different from what I showed you today with the new Workforce. But we're really excited to roll this out, and we've been hearing a lot about people wanting to use ArcGIS for events and management. So just in closing, again, to kind of recap the things we've heard, cities especially have been hearing a lot about increasing events that impact their public infrastructure, but we've also been hearing about other organizations that aren't cities that host events that we could also make use of this type of application. That permit application process, the second bullet there, well, I didn't really show that too much today, but that will be part of the other secondary solution that can be deployed if it's relevant to you, that we'll address. We'll have future webcasts on that from the solutions team that really kind of dive into that permitting piece. These large events, we're really speaking about public safety today and the security risk. So being able to plan for that and protect participants and spectators and the public is really important, obviously. And the tools that are really easy to help set up that planning process through that. So we feel like the tools give you a nice base to just quickly start designing those planning maps. But that's used for a reason, and that's knowing where those resources are, and that's especially for that critical role that a person in dispatch or in the command center that wants to see where are my people or where are my incidents. And then we can also, use all this information, look at events that have happened before. How do we create site maps for an event as we plan for the next one? And, what happened in our after action is really just going to help us plan and set up future events better in the future, because as I mentioned, these events are just increasingly happening in size all the time. So that's it for me. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Mike right now.
Yeah, we got a few questions, Jer. So just a brief Reader's Digest version here, some basic data entry, some basic information collection. You develop the primary applications to manage the event. So what you showed today, again, with just some essential information from an applicant or from an operations person that's getting ready to do a special event. You get a workforce project, you get an operations dashboard, you get a survey 123, and you've integrated tracker for tracking personnel. Does that kind of give it in a nutshell what we're trying to deploy here quickly?
Yep, on the day of, that's a great recap. Workforce for the dispatcher, tracker and survey, and workforce for the field personnel, and then a dashboard for internal staff. So during
I guess shifting from the application process into the actual planning and operations preparation, the applicant, the vendor operator, really just provides that basic information you showed in that initial survey. So, when, where, and a basic point on the map. And then the actual site map and then the operations map, that's aimed at, that persona is the actual public safety representative creating those products, correct?
Correct, yep.
Okay, great. And we had a question also about the survey, and obviously that survey, much like or like all of our surveys, would operate in an offline environment. So if you lost connectivity for whatever reason, they can still collect those surveys and submit them.
Correct. Yeah, and then we've heard that from special events that sometimes the connection can just be so saturated because there's so many people. Yeah, so Survey 123 just inherently has offline capability where you can collect your information and then you get back on to where you have connectivity and it can be resubmitted. The other piece is Workforce is one of the main reasons why they're doing the updates to Workforce is to support that offline capabilities too. So yeah, that will be supported for the offline applications.
Excellent. If an applicant, a venue operator, venue owner, had some additional mapping products or capabilities, say they had a CAD drawing, or say they already had an incident map in GIS available, could they share that into this workflow, into this solution, and we'd be able to use that data as we build our operations map?
Yeah, sure. So we would have to kind of think about that workflow a little bit more, but all of these are really mostly using out-of-the-box technology. So there's just web maps that are powering these applications. So if you have other layers that could be added to a web map, they will appear in these applications. And then there might be other processes that you might want to import that data. But yeah, in short, we know that people are going to want to complement this and add their own data in many cases.
And that data can include, just like we discussed, any other dashboard you see. So it could include camera feeds or, say, UAS drone video feeds and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those are all important things. Drone has been a really big topic, and for us, that's so different that you're not going to have a really repeatable solution. But we see that people would want to take ours and extend it with that type of information for camera or drone data for sure.
Okay, and the last one, we're going to let you go, Jared. So this is a solution just like any other solution available on our solutions.arcgis.com page, and is no additional cost, correct? If you have an account with us, you have access to our solutions.
Correct. Yep. So there's no cost or any solutions. You can deploy them. The only caveat there is you might need additional users. So you think about these applications as long as they have logins to use them. And then for the field piece, we're making use of Tracker. So making sure you have the appropriate licenses for Tracker for getting in the field. But just as someone that wants to go off and deploy the initial onset of the solution, yeah, they're all free solutions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, Jared, again, appreciate your time today. And as we finalize here, we'll certainly send out the links, so you have links to the solution page when it's appropriate, and some other information related to special events. So thank you so much again for everybody's time, and any of the questions that weren't answered online today, we'll follow up with an email with the answers to those questions as well. So Jared, if you can bump, there you go. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you.